John Jeckovich. We're on segment 3 today for July 9th, 2024, and I believe it's the 129th docuseries. We're on chapter 8 of his book. I believe we're on page 203 with Jean, Sonatas, and Bombers.
Jean what?
Jean, Sonatas, and Bombers.
Jean Contact or what?
Sonatas, Sonatas, and Bombers. And so I'm going to pick up on that. And we're speaking prior to Mr. Jeckovich going to the Battle of Bulge. Mr. Jeckovich had several V-mails that they all seemed to disappear, but I was luckily able to obtain V-mails from other soldiers. And so from time to time, if I find a short one, I'll read it. For example, Dearest Mom and Lou, just received your 19th April letter, and I was glad to hear you're all doing well and the tractor business is still intact. So you went to New York and had a big time. I'd give most anything I had to be able to see Lou and with his pants rolled up and a baby cap on. God almighty, did Mom get a jag on and smoke weeds? I have ever to learn to smoke, Mom. A year ago, I was sweating out shells at the beachhead. Today I'm sitting in Hitler's luxurious furnished apartment. This is after the Battle of Bulge. At Hitler's luxurious furnished apartment in Munich, writing a few lines. What a contrast. So now the Battle of Bulge is over with, and his young soldier, Hitler's committed suicide, and is in his Hitler's mansion. And what a contrast, he says. A still great contrast is between his quarters here and a living hell in the Dachau concentration camp only 10 miles from here. So this young soldier, after the Battle of Bulge, had the opportunity to go in Hitler's mansion. And he's saying, what a hell of a difference between a short 10 miles away of looking at these concentration camps. I had the misfortune of seeing the camp yesterday, and I still find it hard to believe what my eyes told me. Railroad runs along the side of the camp as walked towards the boxcars. On the track, I thought of some of the stories I previously read about Dachau and was glad of a chance to see it for myself, just to prove once and for all what I heard was not propaganda. But no, it wasn't propaganda at all. If anything, some of the truth had been held back. In 2 years of combat, can you imagine? I've seen a lot of death, furious death mostly, but nothing here stirred me as this. I can't shrug off the feeling of utter hate I now hold for these people. I've shot Germans with the intent to kill, but only because I had to, or else it would be me. Now I hold no hesitancy whatsoever. The first boxcar I came to had about 40 what were humans in it. All were just bone and a layer of skin over them. Most of their eyes were open and had an indescribable look about them. They had that beaten, what do I do to deserve this look? 20 to 30 other boxcars were the same, bodies on top of each other. Boy, this Hitler was a son of a bitch, and he's burning in hell now, I'll tell you that. No telling how many. No identification as far as I could see. And then in the camp itself, filthy barracks, suitable for about 200 persons, held 1,500. 160,000 persons were originally in the camp, and 32,000 were alive, almost alive, when we arrived. There was a gas chamber and furnace room in one of the barracks. 2 rooms were filled with bodies waiting to be cremated. In one room they were all nude, and another they had prison clothes on, as filthy as dirt itself. How can people do things like this? I never believed that they could until now. The only good thing I noticed about the whole camp was that the scores of the SS guards freshly killed. So the only thing you see in the camp were these son of a bitch and SS guards. They were killed. May they all rot in hell. Some of the prisons newly freed could not control themselves and went from German to German and bashed their heads with sticks and rocks. No one tried to stop them, for we all realized how long they had suffered. I guess the papers have told you about the 7th Army taking Nuremberg and Munich by now. Our division took the greater part of each place and captured many thousand prisoners. We also liberated Russia, Polish, and British, and American prisoners by the thousands. What a happy day for those people. Well, enough for now. Miss you all very much. Your son, Horace. And
Son who?
Your son, Horace. An estimated 6 million Jews, nearly 1/3 of the world, were murdered by the Nazis. Millions of gypsies, homosexuals, Catholics, children, and adults with mental disease, also deemed socially undesirable, were also targeted, but not as relentlessly as the Jews. In October 1946, one of the highest-ranking Nazis sentenced at the Nuremberg to hang for crimes against humanity. Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, was not among those tried and executed. At the end of the war, Goebbels poisoned his 6 children and then instructed the SS guard to shoot him and his wife. On April 30th, 1945, karma's a bitch. On April 30th, 1945, Soviet tanks rumbled into Berlin. Hitler and Eva Braun,
Yeah.
the woman he had married only a few days before, ingested cyanide. Hitler simultaneously put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger on his orders. Their bodies were carried to Chancellery Gardens, doused in gasoline and set afire. Hitler wanted his corpse cremated before the Soviets would get a hold of it. And it's ironic that Hitler was against smoking cigarettes. As soon as all the Germans knew that he was dead, everyone would be smoking back in the castle. Yeah. Wow, so interesting. This man has caused so much hardship. We'll read more of those letters tomorrow, but we'll continue on where we were. All the while she talked, Jean listened intensely, showing a sincere interest in what her mother was saying. I knew Jean was still upset regarding my statement about the music question.
About the what question?
You asked Jean something about music and she didn't like it. She was a music expert, and I think you made a comment, and Jean did not like it. I knew that Jean was still upset regarding my statement about the music question, but looking at her now, I could certainly not ascertain any trace of irritability or annoyance in her demeanor.
Yeah.
I admired her for that, as I was too familiar with the tactic she was applying, although it was not as proficient in its manipulation as she aptly displayed. I would usually go into a temper tantrum and begin to scream, God bless you, and holler for no apparent reason. After I had subsided to an extra extent, I would be annoyed at myself for acting in such a childish manner. The next time I promised myself would be different. I also held her in great esteem for the respect and regard she bestowed upon her parents, and the only hope that her children would reciprocate and show her the same admiration and concern that she did so ably displayed now. After she briefly discussed the forthcoming shopping expedition with her mother, she excused herself and said she would walk me halfway back to the billets. I said my good nights to the Youngs, again thanked them for their kindness and hospitality, and followed Jean to the street. As we began to walk towards the end of the street and the benches that overlooked the town, I thought how I might correct the impasse I had created. As we reached the benches and sat down, the steady drone of many aircraft overhead broke the silence that separated us. There was a full moon in the cloudless sky, a perfect night for bombing, and the RAF was taking full advantage of it. I put my arm around Jean and drew her closer to me. She reached up and kissed me and said, "You'll be back tomorrow." I quickly responded by saying, "Do you want me back after the stunt I pulled about..." What the hell is that noise?
I don't know.
All right, don't worry about it then. "Do you want me back after the stunt?" Sounds like church bells. Are we in a church?
Yeah.
Okay. "Do you want me back after the stunt I pulled about the music?" She became tense and murmured, "Just let it be."
Just gonna close the door.
Murmured, "Of course I want you back. You did not say anything out of the ordinary. You just set me back into correctly assessed as my deep feelings about music, something my parents never comprehended. I was startled that you could perceive and have such an insight into my deepest feelings, that you would have much sensitivity, and my very being overwhelmed and frightened me. Frightened me that someone had profound discernment into my emotions and thoughts, and overwhelmed that someone cared enough to discover my desires and my inner expectations." Having said all that, she rested her head on my chest, and I put my cheek against her head, and I tried to absorb all that she had said. I did not think about it. It was becoming too convoluted, too complicated. I loved Anne, and it was that simple. At least I tried to delude myself into that concept. I did not have enough experience in my background to cope with the magnitude of the problem facing me, and I had so little time to resolve it. A drone of aircraft above me brought me back to the same semblance of reality. In that time, here was quickly coming to an end. I could not help Jean with her problem, even though I wanted to. I greatly sympathized with her and shared her frustrations and anxiety. I would like very much to be here for her and alleviate some of her disappointments and anguish, but it was not to be, and there was no way I could adequately say it.
We had to leave, huh?
What's that?
Yeah, we had to leave.
Yeah. My only response to her request for aid and the understanding was to state that I was getting to be a pest, and maybe her parents should have something to say about my presence dominating their household. "Nonsense," she quickly retorted. "Mother and Dad adore you, and I almost think of you as a son." I was touched by this remark, but did not show it visibly or audibly. I kissed her gently and asked, "What time do you want me to come tomorrow?" She responded, "After services, a little after 1200 hours." With that, I kissed her again and took her hand in mine. It was beginning to feel natural and inviting. We sat there for quite a while as the bombers were seen and heard returning from their missions. Again, I perceived the sensation of the dread and fear, and whatever their fate, they had accomplished their objective and were returning to a comparative safety of their base. I bemoaned the fact that I would not be afforded the same opportunity. I would be in the midst of the shooting war indefinitely, only to leave it by being wounded or killed. With this, I held Jean closer and kissed her passionately and adoringly. She responded with equal vigor, and I knew that we had formed an undisputable bond together, and once we had crossed that fine dividing line, there was no turning back, only forward. Surprisingly, I did not feel frustrated as I did with Anne when we reached this juncture. It wasn't because I finally realized there was no permanence to this delightful interlude, but I should only experience it as much gusto as I could muster. I believe Jean felt the same way. As a matter of fact, I believe she perceived it much sooner than I and grasped it in full significance and outcome. Minutes?
14.
We sat there a bit longer, becoming closer to each other day, and not by so much in what she said, but importantly what she had not said. That was what Anne was trying to convey to me, but I was too preoccupied with my immature thoughts to comprehend a full significance. I felt relieved with that and the assumption to fully enjoy Jean's company. I knew now that it would be ultimately come to an end, and what always remained would be pleasant and cherished memories and a wonderful person whom I was privileged to get to share and be part of. We walked back to the cottage. We walked back to the cottage, and I stopped at the gate. I embraced her and kissed her and said good night and thank you for the pleasant time. She smiled approvingly and said tomorrow at 1200 hours, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and hurried into the cottage. As I entered the orderly room, Fink was sound asleep at the cot near the portable field switchboard. I signed in quickly and walked out. It was about 2400 hours when I finally reached the billets. I waved to the soldier from the 2nd platoon on fire watch for our building. I quickly took my toilet articles from my duffel bag and walked onto the night forward to shower building. I would not take a shower, only to wash up and brush my teeth. I decided to take a shower the next morning before I met Jean. As I walked up the cobblestone street, I thought how strange it seemed to be in a strange country, in a stranger yet surroundings, under different circumstances. We would have thought that I could be doing this 3 months ago, or more to the point, who would have thought that I would be seeing another person soon after saying goodbye to Anne? What would she say or think if she knew of my present situation? Strangely, I could not think of a better place to be right here in a small, nondescript town with all its kind of simple facts and non-conforming and unorthodox way of life. This was far superior to the life I led before entering the military service, but my wildest imagination, I could not see in which this would be attainable. I did not want to even think about going back to that life of nothingness and empty despair. The morning being Sunday, our only standard procedure option was a march and chow formation, and no stragglers were allowed to just saunter down the street to mess hall. As I was hungry, I got up to dress in my fatigues several minutes before formation formed outside the street. A little over half of the company fell out as the rest was either sleeping in or on some detail on pass or on sick call or accountable in some other way. The breakfast was delicious as usual, consisting of baked eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, toast, and hot coffee, all you wanted. After the usual 40 minutes allotted to eat, we waited outside to fall in for the march back to the billets. What this procedure accomplished was it made it difficult to stay down here in the heart of town after chow on a weekend. Instead, we were forced to go back up and change and walk back down individually. The mess hall uniforms was fatigues, helmet liner, just for that purpose. A uniform for the pass or sign out was Class A, OD's tie, field jackets, and overseas cap. In my situation, I was going back down rather going up, shovel tears. I dare say many soldiers have ever seen. I did improvise upon this procedure during the rest of the stay at Haverfordwest. I would sign out in fatigues under the pretext of showering, which I usually did, but instead I returned to the billets. I would head up to Jean's cottage. This worked well for me most of the time. Minutes.
9.
After 1,200 hours of chow, I avoided Fink and Larson and scurried into the orderly room to sign out and make my way up to Jean's cottage. On the way up, civilians would wave to me as they stood in the doorway, talking in groups of 2s and 3s. There were not too many young males about, and the younger girls my age or older would glance at me and smile and wave hello. I was felt especially elated and macho at the display of interest, never thinking a moment that they were starved for companionship of the opposite sex, their own age. I thought that it was the uniform or the individual wearing it. I reached Jean's place and I did not see anyone about. I used a huge brass knocker on the door. Shortly the door opened and Mrs. Young greeted me enthusiastically and invited me in. She first offered me a cup of tea, as I accepted. She told me that Jean was still dressing and would be out momentarily. Mrs. Young also informed me that Mr. Young was out on an errand and would be back shortly. She said that she was in the midst of holiday house cleaning and to excuse the condition of the parlor. I smiled and said it was nothing. She should see the billets on Saturday or Sunday. She nodded and said that she could imagine, but that was expected of a group of young men. She did mention that Jean was always neat about picking up after herself. Just then Jean walked in. The sight of her made my adrenaline pump much faster and my dormant sexual urge become active again. She was wearing a tight-fitting white blouse under her blazer jacket with a tight, shorter than usual straight black skirt. What got me the most excited was her nude-colored nylons and the sling-back high-heel pumps she was wearing. She knew immediately that I was pleased with her appearance and softly kissed her mother goodbye. She took my hand and we walked out the front door. I quickly said goodnight to Mrs. Young and waved and smiled approvingly at the both of us. When we got outside, I stopped and looked at Jean and explained, "You look beautiful and you smell gorgeous." She laughed and held my hand again as we walked toward the gate. "Shouldn't I call a cab to drive us to town?" I volunteered. "A cab for what?" she replied. "The walk will do us good." I said something about walking in high heels, but she dismissed it quickly as she held my hand and directed us to the street. As we walked, the clicking over high heels and cobblestone pavements reminded me of Anne, but I quickly put it out of my mind, basking instead in the glow of the radiance of a beautiful woman by my side.
Where's this guy going?
Once again, I don't know.
What the hell's he got?
Bring in some water for her.
What?
Hello.
Oh,
Make sure she sees it. Huh?
A cab, I asked her if she was tired, and they were out rather late the night before, and she had to go up early services that morning.
Oh,
She said no and sidestepped the puddle of the water from the last night downpour. I do it all the time and I'm quite used to it. I then asked if she had eaten and she was vague and obscure about it, which meant that she had not. At that moment we passed out a box of public phone and I stopped and insisted she call a cab or cabbie. She attempted to sidestep the issue. As I preserved, she finally concurred. Where would you like to eat, she asked as she fingered through. As she fingered through the phone box, I said I did not know and that she should use your own discretion. She then mentioned the place her parents frequently took her. Great, I replied. Ring them up and instead call a cabbie. She found out the number, got the operator. Haverfordwest 197. She repeated the number twice to the operator at the other hand. Please send a cab to 47 Castle Road. She again repeated the cottage address. As we waited over our ride, Jean kept insisting that this was all unnecessary, since it had been reconditioned, continued walking. After a 20-minute wait for the cab arrived and Jean gave him our destination. Pembroke House, please, she stated as she sat in a rather cramped rear seat. I thought it was great for being cramped as we were. Jean's skirt would have a tendency to be pulled upward, which exposed a good part of her knees and upper legs. I thought that was exciting. The ride down several tiers was exhilarating, to say the least, and Jean kept looking at me and smiling. Each drive, the driver took a sharp curve, almost leaving the road and heading for one of the cottages. I was holding Jean's hand and I noticed that she was wearing nail polish, a light pink, which was very appealing and appropriate. Her hands and fingers were smaller than Anne's, but she was expressive the rest of her body and stature. We finally reached the hotel, which was in the entire center of town. As I attempted to pay the driver, I finally got up and handed a fistful of change to Jean to sort out and pay the cabbie. Minutes?
1 minute, 40 seconds.
Okay. As we entered the lounge, I was impressed with the huge log fire blazing in the mammoth wall-sized fireplace. It felt warm and friendly, where one could just sit and stare into the radiant glow. We were escorted into the dining room, was large and spacious, and I immediately drawn to the old world original beam ceiling. The beams must have been 3 feet across, were huge, which added a great deal to the atmosphere and the nuance to the dining room. Were these great big beams in that restaurant you went to? In Haverfordwest, you went to the Pembroke House. Were those great big beams in the ceiling?
oh yeah, big 6x6 beams.
Yeah, explain them to me. What do they look like?
Yeah, how do they get them up there?
6 by 6, that's mammoth.
Yeah,
Wow.
and that's what, 20 feet high,
Wow.
20 feet up.
How the rest of the restaurant look?
It's old fashioned, but it's well kept.
Very well kept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Minutes? Very well kept.
23 seconds.
And do you remember what you had for dinner that night
What?
at the Pembroke House? When you were with Jean?
Oh, we had roast lamb, salad, baked red potatoes, and